Evolutionary biologist J.B.S. Haldane famously remarked that his god had an inordinate fondness for beetles. With beetles alone making up about a quarter of all known animal species, we really do live in the world of the beetles. This is a darkling beetle. There are roughly 15,000 species of darkling beetles alone, more than all bird species alive today. We'll be focusing on their roles in the pet trade industry. With me, I have Russ, one of the few people who have successfully bred blue death feigning beetles in captivity.
Their blue coloration is just unique. It's eye-catching. People, you're used to seeing black beetles and even beetles of other colors, but kind of a powder blue beetle is something that's dramatic. Because most of these beetles in the hobby, the vast majority of them still, are wild caught, you don't know what age you get. You could be getting a beetle that just metamorphosed a few weeks ago, or you could get a beetle that's 15 years old and probably won't live very long. My sincere hope is that it will become a lot more common. That's part of the reason why I have been very open with explaining, I'm not trying to keep any kind of secret here about how it works. I want people to do it if they're interested in these beetles being kept in captivity. I think, captive breeding should be an important part of what's going on with these beetles. It's probably fairly sustainable to collect a certain number of them from the wild, unlike it would be for a lot of other species of creatures, some reptiles, for example, where captive breeding is really the only way you should do it for a lot of those. But for these beetles, perhaps it's not the only way to do it, but it should be part of it. And I really hope that people just kind of take and run with it. I've seen that there are other beetles that people are willing to spend a lot of time and money on, like rhinoceros beetles or Hercules beetles, things like that, to raise a small number of beetles and put a lot of time and a fair amount of money into that. And so I think there are probably people out there who are willing to do that. Parts of the process have never been particularly difficult, and that is usually getting them to mate, getting them to lay eggs, getting the larvae to be produced, not difficult. Rearing the larva, a little bit more difficult, but the difficult point has really been getting them to pupate successfully. And I would say that the pupation, getting enough larvae to the size and age where they're ready to pupate, is a little bit more complicated than I would have thought, I guess. I get plenty of larvae, that's not a problem. But finding the best way to keep the larvae in such a way that they will grow fast and dependably without cannibalization, which can be a problem, it's just a little more tricky. It's not so much that it's difficult as it is just knowing what the triggers were and then being able to provide those triggers. I think for a while we didn't know what caused them to pupate. We just didn't know. And then Dean Ryder discovered it. He discovered that it's a simple matter of a temperature trigger of about 88 degrees. It can work in the 80s, but 88 seems to be like that magic number where it really stimulates pupation. And then the relative humidity needs to be rather higher than you might expect for desert beetles, around 75 to 80% relative humidity. So if you can provide both of those consistently, that really seems to be the key. And a lot of reptile keepers, for example, have an incubator already where they can provide those triggers. So as long as they have larvae and are able to provide a situation like that, then it's not that difficult. Many of them don't have that kind of thing just lying around and are thinking, well, I don't want to spend $60, $80 on an incubator. For the beetles, I spent $20 on the beetles and their entire setup. So it's not a small time investment. It's not a small space investment when you consider the size of the beetles. It partly depends on what someone is looking for in a pet. They're certainly not going to be extremely interactive, although you can handle them. It's not so much that the beetles are, seeking out human attention or anything like that. But if you want something that's simple and that you can leave safely for a weekend without any worry that that's going to cause your pet any kind of distress or discomfort, and even longer than that, I mean, a well-fed, well-hydrated beetle, you could easily leave for 2 weeks, 3 weeks and be fine. It'll come back and you'll find a healthy, happy beetle. I would say if you want something low maintenance, something that careful children with a little bit of supervision can handle on occasion, and that is very interesting to observe, then yeah, it's a great option.
Most people familiar with darkling beetles know them exclusively from their role as pet food, with their larval forms adopting the names mealworms and superworms. Their actual names are Tenebrio molitor and Zophobos morio. The larvae make good food for animals able to deal with their chitin, including reptiles as well as other arthropods. Although they are commonly reared in horrible conditions, raising a few of these longevic beetles in proper housing and collecting their grubs as food for other pets can be very rewarding. Like chickens laying eggs, except the eggs are fully formed babies, and the chickens are beetles in a box.
And morio beetles, I have some. There's some just a couple feet away from me in my leopard gecko enclosure, and they're great as part of the cleanup crew, and they're fun to watch. I'd say my only objection I have to morio beetles, because certainly they're definitely much easier to rear, is that they produce that repugnatorial fluid, which is it's really kind of nasty, and it sticks on your hands, and you can wash your hands, and your hands still smell like that for a while. Even doesn't matter how well you wash them, it still stinks. And they will often just release that smell when they're even slightly disturbed. You don't even necessarily need to handle them. Like, I will lift up a piece of cork bark that has some of the beetles under it, and when I do, it'll release the smell. I think the morio beetles are great, but I do have that one objection. I think they would be a lot more popular if that were not the case.